Folks, I always hate to dampen fellowship time, but let's go ahead and gather up. I imagine that we'll have some other folks join us in a little bit, but I'd like to make sure that we have full time for Professor Siao. I wish a couple of our, I'll hand them to you, Karen, in a minute, and Ken and Mary as well. I've got some handouts for you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to bounce into another class this morning, so I will look forward to you all who I see in the midweek to school me about the big fish. I'm glad that we get Behemoth and Leviathan today. These are, I think, two of my favorite characters in the Bible. I don't know if you remember, one of my favorite memories, Professor Siao, at Princeton was we would occasionally do themed dinner nights at the refectory, and you would, one of them every year was come as your favorite Bible character. And I remember one of the folks trying to make a behemoth costume and come as that. Off mic, I may tell you what my friend Bill Carter did one time that was the best costume at all, but we won't go into that today. I am so very, very grateful. And the conversation last week after class about all of the animals and all of the order and how that opened up that text for us was so incredibly helpful. And honestly, I never had, that's, sort of like Kansas and Iowa, the flyover country, part of the country, that pretty much had been that part of Job for me as well. So thank you for giving us a close reading of these texts. We'll have one more week with you next week. And am, again, so deeply, deeply grateful for your friendship. But I'll pass out to you all right now.
Thank you. So this week I'm packing all of Leviathan and Behemoth together. Okay. I'm trying to pack it all together. So next week we'll have a chance to look at Job's response and the epilogue. So today I want to begin with the traditional view, the view you're probably familiar with regarding Leviathan and Behemoth. So the Christian view of Behemoth is really based on the Greek Bible than the Hebrew. Christians did not use the Hebrew Bible until the 16th century, the Reformation. So based on Greek Bible, which is very different, especially in the Behemoth and Leviathan passage. So the word for behemoth in the Greek text is beast. And so Origen, the first Christian scholar in the 3rd century, argued the beast means the same thing as Leviathan, which is dragon. So the beast in question is a dragon. And once you translate this as dragon, it gets associated with the dragon, of course, in the New Testament. So for Origen, behemoth, Leviathan is one creature. It's a symbol of all that is evil, the devil, the Antichrist. So in the 10th century, they give the 12th century, well, starting 10th century, you get image of Leviathan as Antichrist, as in this famous painting of the Antichrist, handsome-looking fellow, gesturing to the left. On the left side is his resume. The resume is based on a 10th century work by a monk called Azzo of Montonder, in which is the opposite of the resume of a hero, is the anti-resume. So it's Antichrist. So this Antichrist is gesturing to the left, his resume on how he is the quintessential Antichrist. And then he's riding the beast. So this is a very common Christian view. Okay? Hobbes' Leviathan is based on the frontispiece is more or less based on this. Okay. So throughout Europe, you get illustrations like this, the doors of his mouth. You get the hell mouth on the corner of the tympana. You get hell mouth open, waiting to swallow up sinners. Here again, you have a picture of the Lincoln Cathedral of Leviathan swallowing up human beings. So these are all quite common. So in the Greek text, Leviathan makes the abyss boil like a cauldron. And you have illustrations of the hell mouth with a cauldron inside it. And in Christian anti-Semitism, the Jews are the ones who get boiled in the cauldron. Very, very common view among Christians. This was a standard view among Christians till about 1555, and then continued again, not as dominant, to the 18th century. Okay. The traditional view of the Jews is quite different. I suspect that most of us are not familiar with this, but for Jews, behemoth was a land animal, probably the wild bull. Leviathan was a sea creature, a serpentine fish, Ouroboros, a tail biter. And for Christians, Leviathan is a symbol of the devil. For Jews, a symbol of messianic hope. Think about that. So here is a medieval illustration of Leviathan as tail biter. And one poem from the 6th century, his tail, mightily gripped in his mouth, girds the great sea like a ring. So Leviathan is a tail biter, and it's kind of a fish. And this is the fish that will be used in the messianic banquet to feed the righteous. Well, if Leviathan is going to be a fish that will feed the righteous, it must be kosher. And so they go to great length to explain how Leviathan was a kosher fish. And so you get very common illustration of this. The top scene, you see Leviathan in the center. The left side, you see Behemoth, the wild ox, and the mythological bird named Zeus. And Leviathan circles, it forms a circle of the world, right? And circles of the world. The bottom is a messianic banquet. Okay, so this is signs of messianic hope. Now, this is still present today. Here is a stained glass window for an modern American synagogue. You see on the left side, Zeus flying. On the right side, you see, I'm afraid to touch it, it's so sensitive. You have this, he's seen here, see, a Leviathan, Behemoth here, and then the banquet at the bottom. It's a modern American synagogue. And it's very common throughout Eastern Europe. You get scenes like this, where this Ouroboros surrounds a synagogue or a house protectively. And so in Jewish folk art, as in this 1902 example, embroidery, you have the Ouroboros surrounding the city of Hebron. And it's here, it says here, the handiwork of Hannah, Rivka, Haman of Jerusalem, holy city. And this is a embroidery, a cover for the halal bread. So this explains partly why Jews during Shabbat eat fish, kosher fish, namely they eat Leviathan as a foretaste of the Messianic banquet. And this is present today in 2002. You see, this was set up in Los Angeles. So it shows that even though Christians to this day think of Leviathan as the devil, Jews see Leviathan as Messianic hope. Two vastly contrasting views, depending on whose Bible they use. Now, in the modern period, we have a sort of consensus. It began with Thomas Aquinas, who wrote the first literal commentary of the Book of Job. And so this marked a major turning point in that he turns away from the allegorical approach from the 3rd century onwards. Okay. And so he argues that Behemoth and Leviathan are two natural, literal animals, namely the elephant and the whale. But even though they are natural animals, they symbolize evil. So really not that much difference in meaning. So this became the dominant approach from 1265 to the mid-16th century, and is promoted especially by Martin Luther. And then in 1553, John Calvin preached 2 sermons on Leviathan and Behemoth. Calvin preached 159 sermons in a year on Job. And Calvin followed Aquinas to argue that these were literal animals, namely the elephant and the whale. But for the first time, he says there is no symbolic meaning. They are simply natural animals, the elephant and the whale. Then why are they in the Bible? Well, they are produced here to elicit praise of divine power and creativity. The point is that God created these wonderful creatures, you see. So Calvin says, elephant and the whale, but only literal animals, no symbolic meaning whatsoever. They do not represent the devil. Then in 1663, a Protestant minister by the name of Samuel Bochart wrote a very learned study of sacred fauna. And he argues that Behemoth represents hippopotamus. Behemoth is the little hippopotamus, and Leviathan is the crocodile. So this became the dominant view to this day. Behemoth is hippopotamus, and Leviathan is crocodile. And so in 1851, P.T. Barnum promoted his circus act of the great behemoth of Scripture. You have to come and see the great behemoth of Scripture, namely hippopotamus. And the most famous animal trainer of the period, Isaac van Amberg, said this. In fact, you were practically offending God not to see the menagerie. In the book of Job, have the Lord telling Job to, behold now, behemoth, which I have made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Biblical scholars identify behemoth as a hippopotamus. Well, where can you see the hippo? But in a menagerie. And where can you see menagerie? By the circus. So if you don't go to the circus, you're offending God. So, because of things like this, you get George Bernard Shaw. If this is the case, if the whole point about Behemoth and Leviathan is that God can create such wondrous creatures, that's ignoble irrelevance, said Bernard Shaw. It's as if Job comes to God and says, God, I'm really suffering. You've been unjust to me. And God said, yeah, but can you make a hippo? How relevant is that? So the topic, as announced in the opening part of the passage, gird your loins like a man. I will ask you, and you will inform me. Will you disregard my justice? Will you declare wrong so that you may be right? In the first speech, the topic was Itzah, namely plan, counsel, God's design for the cosmos. In the second speech, the word there is mishpat, which is the word for justice. But this word for justice occurs 20-some times, mostly in the mouth of Job, also means jurisdiction, as used in the sense here of God's jurisdiction, which is more than justice. It includes justice, but it's more than justice. It is what God's rule of the universe. And so God challenges Job first by taunting him. He taunts Job. So basically, he tells Job, you think you are God? So he challenges Job to play dress up, as it were. Can you adorn yourself? So can you pretend that you are God and act like God, and be in charge of the whole world? Make sure that no proud person ever escape punishment. Make sure no wicked person ever escape punishment. Can you do all of this? And if you have this kind of jurisdiction, then even I will confess you. So the word to confess, the last word there, even I will acknowledge you. That word acknowledge, always people acknowledging God. It's the essence of God acknowledging human beings. Job can do all these things, exercise justice over the whole cosmos, then even God will confess Job. Okay. So here the term for God is El. That is the term for the high God of the pantheon, as you see on the top right side. Okay, that's El. Do you have an arm like El? Do you thunder with a voice as he does? That is an image based on Baal, the storm deity. So these are two dominant deities in ancient Canaan and two dominant metaphors for God in the Bible. Okay. So Job is neither the royal kingly God nor the fighting warrior God. Then comes the praise of Behemoth. Here now is Behemoth, my creator as with you. He eats grass like cattle. Here now his strength in his loins and vigor is in his muscles, his abdomen, and so forth. His appendage, the word normally is translated as tail, but the word tail here probably means penis. Okay. His appendage is firm like cedar. The sinew of his thighs are tight. His limbs are bronze tubes. His bronze like iron bars. This is the only description, physical description of Behemoth. Now I ask you, based on this description, do you think it's an elephant? Do you think it's a wild ox? Do you think it's a water buffalo? None of the description here fits any one animal in particular, right? The focus is all on muscularity, on sexuality, on potency in all senses of the term. They all focus on muscularity and especially of the lower thighs or of the lower limbs. Okay, so this is not a taxonomy. It's not a zoological description. It is it's an ode in praise of a creature. We have similar terms used of odes to a particular king from ancient Sumer, Shulgi of the city of Ur. He's praised for his physical stature, his muscles, his limbs, vigor, virility, sex appeal. He's like the great wild bull and the bull of heaven, great bull with splendid limbs. All of these we find in the description of Behemoth. We have similar odes to power of gods and the supermortals. Marduk, the god of Babylon, was of him is his figure was substantial. He was manly at his emergence, powerful from the start. His members were sculpted beyond comprehension, lofty among gods, superb in body, his limbs long. The cluster of terms there sound very much like our description of Behemoth. Gilgamesh, the most famous hero of ancient world, was a wild bull with splendid limbs. And your one text, let me show you Gilgamesh, man of all seasons. Look at him. See his appearance. Well-formed in manliness, possessing awesomeness. His entire body is imbued with vigor. All these terms are common of gods and of kings. These are terms describing power. Another king, Tukulti-Ninurta, his figure is reckoned the nature of the gods. Shalmaneser III, So for the Sumerians, the gods dwelt at the source of Tigris and Euphrates in the northwestern mountains of Syria. And the kings took great pride when they were able to end up there, you see. So Shalmaneser took his soldiers and he found his way there. And like all of us, when he got there, first thing he did was took a selfie. He had an image of himself made to show that he had the muscularity, the power to reach even the abode of gods. So of him, they said his strength, he has virility like a wild bull. Another king, Esarhaddon, strength, virility, fullness of chest. All these terms are very common. Okay? So at the end of the 3rd millennium, we get an image of a king. This is King Naram-Sin of Akkad. Notice all figures are much smaller than he. He is shown with muscular arms. His abdomen perfectly flat. And he wears a horn to symbolize power. He's the first king to portray himself as a divine figure on earth. The horn that represents divine power. So this is very common. Okay? So the behemoth that we have is not a particular animal, but the image there reminds us of certain creatures in Mesopotamia, in the so-called bison men contest scenes. This used to be called bullmen. Bullmen, except now they see that they always have beards like this, you see. Oops. So we know that the bisons. They're typically shown with humanoid body, with face or human face, muscular lower limbs, and often shown in sexual posture, often shown having sexual intercourse or with erect penis, as we see in this case. See that? That's very common. So sensitive, this thing. Okay. So another scene here, you see the bull man. Again, you see the erect penis on the left side. I'm afraid to touch this. See? Right? So it's a very, very common scene showing a combination of animal muscularity and human. And this is a famous scene of the bison man. And this is the name of a plaque of a famous Babylonian king. And at the bottom here, you see on his throne, there are two bison men, right, propping up the throne. Okay, the throne there represents the heaven. Okay? And they're propping up the throne. This is associated with the sun god. The sun god is the god of justice. So in Sumerian and Babylonian art, the bison man are associated with sun god, which is associated with justice, which is precisely the issue in our text. Okay. And typical of in ancient Syria, you see bison men, the one in the middle holding up a footstool. The footstool represents the heavens, as also in the Bible. The footstool represents heaven, Isaiah 60, forget which verse. Okay. But so they prop up the heaven, and then you have the sun disk above it. So the bison men are associated with the sun god, who is associated with justice. Another example here, again, two bison men, each holding a leg of a footstool on which the sun disk hovers. So this is very typical, just ubiquitous in northern Syria and southern Turkey. So continuing the ode to Behemoth, he is the first of God's ways, a creature that rules the dry land. There's nothing in the text that suggests opposition between Behemoth and God. In fact, God kind of likes Behemoth, he's proud of him. He's my best work, you see. So this goes against the human view, right? And I argued that in the first divine speech, it makes the point that human beings are not at the center of creation. Genesis 2 and 3, human beings in the center of the garden. The garden is all built around human beings, right? So the first divine speech makes the point that human beings are not at the center. The second divine speech makes the point that human beings are not the acme of creation. Genesis 1, all things are created, and the crown of creation is human beings. Well, not so. In this speech, the crown of God's creation is Behemoth, this ugly hybrid creature that terrifies us. That's God's best work. God's at his best when God created Leviathan. He's the first of God's ways, a creature that rules the dry land, not human beings. Human beings see themselves as the crown of creation. They get to rule over all creatures. But now the poet says, not so. Behemoth, this ugly dude, this power is the one that rules the dry land. The mountains bring him produce or tribute. So those who argue that this refers to hippopotamus have trouble with this verse, because hippopotamus do not consume timber. And so they amend the text to say the mountains, the rivers bring him tribute. See, so they fix the text to make it suit the theory. But here the mountains bring him tribute. All the wild animals laugh there. So I talk about Mesopotamia and how it is the muscularity and so forth, very common in royal propaganda. Well, in Mesopotamian poetry, you have people bringing tributes from the north. So in Mesopotamia, the idea of, so if you have a kingdom empire in the Mesopotamian plains, tribute coming from the northern mountains, the Zagros mountain, in the northwest, those were seen as far edges of the universe, right? and people will bring tribute from the north to the king. And you have the Gilgamesh epic. The foreign kings will bring the offering to the mountain and the land as tribute. Another, they talk about tribute coming from the mountains. Right? So over and over again in the inscriptions, we find this trope of tribute from the mountains, which symbolize cosmic power. Okay, Ashurbanipal, the king, with the muscular chest and strong limbs, he ruled all the mountains and received their tribute. So too in iconography, we find an example of this rock relief in a palace of Ashurbanipal, where the emissaries come from the far edges of the world, bringing tribute of various sorts. We know they come from the North Syrian mountains because the footwear, the footwear with the curled end here, that's Syrian footwear. So these are emissaries coming from the mountains in the northwest. And this one is a remarkable scene of timber being floated down the mountains. So they brought Phoenician sailors. Phoenicians were the most famous sailers. So the Phoenician sailors tow timber from the mountains down to Sumer, down to Mesopotamia. This is a tribute from the mountains. So then for mountains bring him tribute, and all the wild animals laugh there. The idea of laughter is an important one. Laughter doesn't necessarily mean it was a joke. It just means ease. It means ease. So you have in the Psalms, God laughs at the wicked. The nations royal, they stand up to challenge God, but God only laughs. In other words, God is at ease. So Eliphaz talks about restoration of Job. If Job will only respond properly, if Job, instead of being angry, will respond properly to God, to praise God, then Job will laugh at devastation and famine, and he will not fear the wild animals of the earth. If you respond properly to your suffering, then it will all be easy for you. This image of restoration is one that Job himself will talk about, how in good days he laughed, which means he was at ease, comfortable with reality. And we got all the animals in the preceding speech all laugh. They're comfortable with the environment. Leviathan also laugh. So laughter is a very common scene. And that is, we find in the East, we have royal iconography, where you have animals playing about in the park, jumping about, laughing, enjoying themselves. They're at ease. So all these are very common. The animals playing. The word for laugh in Hebrew is also the word for play. The animals at play in the wild signifies their ease, their comfort with the environment. So by the 8th century, so the power had moved to Assyria, which is in the mountainous region, central Mesopotamia. But by the 8th century, the dominant threat to Assyria was from the south, the marshland in present-day Bosra in Iraq. So because of that, the new frontier of the world were the swamps. Right? So last week, I talked about how the kings built zoological park, botanical gardens. So they have these parks, and they brought plants, trees from all over the then known world, right, to have this microcosm of the cosmos. And they brought all these wild animals, lions and bears, and so forth, to the region to represent the control of the cosmos. But now that the main threat to the empire comes from the south of the marshland becomes the outer edges of the cosmos. And so in the new zoo of Ashurbanipal in the 7th century, they included wetlands. And so you have this wetlands, swamps, where animals like this were at ease. Okay. Right, so the swamp becomes part of the political propaganda. And nearer the end of the ode, so you have the ode in praise of Leviathan, and suddenly now you get behemoth in the morass. The word morass in English, borrowed from French, means marsh. It means marsh. So Behemoth is under lotuses, like a covert of reeds, even in the swamp. The lotuses cover him as his shelter. The willows. So you have now Behemoth, who is supposed to be the ruler of dry land, now in a morass, both in the figurative and literal sense. What's remarkable about this passage, though, are the number of terms here. I don't have the number of terms here. A covert of reeds. The term covert is very frequently found in the Psalms for the protection of God. Lotuses cover him as a shelter. Cover and shelter are also used in the Psalms of divine cover and shelter. So a number of terms here refer to divine protection. So it seems that this terrible animal, even in the morass, enjoys divine providence. The language is very clearly of divine providence of the vulnerable. So Behemoth, even when he's in trouble, seemed to enjoy divine protection. And here in one of the drawings, I talk about the propaganda and how the kings depicted the swamp. In a very candid portrayal, we have the swamp with 3 refugees hiding. These are political refugees escaping the retribution of the Assyrian king. I talk about how the Babylonians were a threat to Assyrians, right? So in a particular rebellion, the king decided to pursue the Babylonians. And so they went after the Babylonians, and these guys fled and they hid in the swampland. And here we have a picture of them hiding, right? But our text claims that even Behemoth in such a place receives protection from God. So what can we say about Behemoth then? Behemoth is neither a natural animal nor a maleficent embodiment of evil. There's nothing in the text that suggests that Behemoth is antagonistic to Yahweh. Nothing in the text that suggests Behemoth is evil. It's terrifying. It's uncanny, right? It is not something we're comfortable with, but it's not evil. He is a spectacular exhibit of divine creativity in all its contradictions. Behemoth is a monstrous other who is not crushed or deliberately subdued, as one might desire, but he thrives. Even in a morass, a marsh, a liminal space between dry land and chaotic waters, Behemoth continues to benefit from God's ecological providence. Indeed, this dreadful monster, whom God holds up as a creative masterpiece like wisdom, teaches by patient and confident conduct how a creature may respond to adversity. Text says, even in the deep waters, with the currents rushing, he is confident. The word for confident is the word for to have faith. So Behemoth, even when under pressure, has faith. Even when the river oppresses, he has faith. Contradictory to Job. Because Job says, that the wadis threaten him, and he used the word for faith, right? And now here, he accuses God of oppressing him. Chapter 10. Chapter 10, he imagines cross-examining God. He asks God, do you like oppressing people? Right? And so Job thinks God is oppressing him. But Behemoth, even when he's oppressed by the river currents, continues to have faith, to have confidence. Nature, even in such a monstrous iteration, may be revelatory of the divine jurisdiction of divine justice, even if only ambiguously. Then comes Leviathan. Unlike Behemoth, who is not known as a monster in any other biblical text or elsewhere in the ancient world, Leviathan is known in at least three other passages. Psalm 74, 13 to 14, talk about God shattering the heads, multiple heads of a sea monster, crushing the heads of Leviathan. So Leviathan, according to this text, is multi-headed. Psalm 104, verse 26, speaks of Leviathan, mention of Leviathan along with ships. So Leviathan is a creature of the ocean. Among the creatures, he's among the creatures that God has made. And God provides for and sustains Leviathan, just as God provides for and sustains lions, ibexes, and other creatures. Psalm 27, God will punish Leviathan, who is called a fleeing serpent, a twisty serpent, and a sea monster. Okay, so we have biblical text, but Leviathan's background goes back much further. In Mesopotamia, we have examples of this. On the top left, we have a seven-headed monster who's being tamed by a god in the front and the back. And it's got flames coming out of his body. Okay? That's from the 3rd millennium, Eshnunna, which is in Assyria. On the right side, we have a seven-headed monster and a deity in front of him trying to calm him down. On the left bottom side, we have a dragon and a god running over. The bottom right, we have a chaos monster in the famous Ishtar Gate of Babylon. So these are monsters that are equivalent of Leviathan, found in Mesopotamia from about 3500 BC onwards. And they're found as far east as the Indus Valley. In Anatolia, we have this image of two heroes trying to tame a dragon, and you have this hailstone on the dragon. Okay, it's on the myth of Iluyanka in Mesopotamia, and this was brought over to Greece and later on to Indus Valley. In ancient Canaan, in a place called Ugar, oh, my typing is terrible. The Leviathan is called Litan in Ugaritic, in the Canaanite literature. It's called a slithery serpent, a twisty serpent, as in Isaiah 27:1, the same pair of terms. It's said to be seven-headed, as in Revelation and Psalm 74, and is mentioned with an array of other aquatic animals. It goes all the way south, where Leviathan is a sea monster, an aquatic monster, dwelling in the abyss, in the underworld, dark underworld. And the sun each day goes down to the abyss. It goes through a gate called Swallower, and it enters the abyss called hell, basically, hole, a dark hole, where this chaotic monster tries to prevent the sun boat from emerging to start another day. Okay. And so you have here at the front of the boat, at the prow, the god Set trying to suppress the monster so that the sun boat can journey on to start a new day. Okay. And on earth, I'm afraid to touch this, so sensitive. Okay, so on earth you have incantation, people utter incantation. And so they made effigies. They made effigies of the monster, and they subject it to all manner of abuse. They make wax effigies from papyrus, and they stamp on it, pee on it, stab it with knives, and so forth, you see, to enact the suppression of chaos monster so that the sun can start a new day. This is the background. Okay. Then we have Leviathan now in 40:24 to 29. Here we have a satire. Okay, this passage, my reading of this passage is entirely different from others. Scholars have read this passage as a description of the capture of the crocodile. Capture of crocodile, but there are many texts that are problematic with it. Okay, will he be taken? Can Leviathan be captured by his eyes? Will he be pierced in the nose as the ensnared? The word ensnare here referring to bird snare. You don't catch a sea monster with traps used for birds. Okay? So the word for snare there is used for rope noose to trap birds. How can you catch a monster, a mythological chaos monster with such silly equipment? Will you drag Leviathan with a fish hook or thread his tongue with a line? So scholars have puzzled over this because they assume the Leviathan is crocodile. Well, crocodiles have very tiny tongues. So what does it mean to thread his tongue with a line? I don't think this has to do with crocodile at all. This has to do with the processing of captives in Mesopotamia. As you see in this picture here, this is from a cosmetic palette around 3000 BCE. It represents the southern king of Egypt, of Upper Egypt. You see this guy in the center, holding a mace, beating a captive. The captive represents the king of the northern, of the Nile Delta. And above him, you see a plot of land with a clump of papyrus that in Egyptian refers to Delta land, the southern king, the northern Egypt. And notice the figure here. I'm so afraid to touch this. It's got the lip or the nose has got a rope to it, and it's held on by a falcon holding the rope. The falcon refers to the king, the Egyptian pharaoh, is a manifestation of Horus, the god, who is the falcon. In other words, the god of the north, the god of Lower Egypt, the mountainous region of Egypt, suppresses the king of Upper Egypt, of Lower Egypt. Right? So that's processing of the prisoner. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, you find this image of a goddess leading captives by their nose. So once they capture their captives, they will put a ring through the lips or the tongue or the nose and lead them along like creatures. That's what this text is describing. It's not describing the capture of crocodile. It's talking about people imagining that they can somehow subdue Leviathan. Okay? Right? You can hardly suppress human monsters, much less the mythological one. And here we have a picture of Esarhaddon, typical propaganda. The king is huge and his rivals are tiny. See? So at the bottom, you have two prisoners. In fact, they represent the Egyptian pharaoh from the Ethiopian dynasty. And he's got a nose ring. He's got a ring on his lip or nose. And each of these figures, a leash leads up to the hand of the god. So this is very, very common, right? Very common in iconography throughout the ancient world. See? So when they capture somebody, they put out their eyes, blind them, and then that's what's describing here. So can one capture him by his eyes? See? Pierce his nose with tines? Will you draw Leviathan with a hook? Thread his tongue with a line? Will you put a reed through his nose? Or with a hook pierce his jaws? It's nothing to do with the capture of crocodile. Right? Will he plead vociferously with you? See the bottom figures? See? Will he plead vociferously? Will he try to make a covenant with you? So the kings typically will submit themselves, bow and swear to be perpetual servants of the captor. You cannot do this with monster Leviathan. Right? Will you play with him as with a bird, or tie him up for your girls? And we've got pictures of the griffin being held by a leash by a god. Leviathan is a terrible monster. It's not a bird you can put on a leash for your girls to play with. Will partners haggle over him? Will he be divided among merchants? Will you riddle his skin with harpoons, his head with fishing spears? Set your hand upon him, and so forth. So very common in iconography also are images of the sea monster. At the bottom you see, not very clearly, I don't think. I'm afraid to touch this. Okay, so you see right at the bottom of the snake, you see little brown knives. So his body is riddled with knives. These knives represent the incantation to suppress the monster. But I see this in iconography. So can you riddle Leviathan's body with knives? Another example here, they try to tie down Leviathan, hold him down, right? You cannot tame Leviathan. So you hear this speech then ends, so don't mess with him. Don't think of you fighting him. You are not his match. You cannot tame Leviathan. That's the whole point of the satire. Don't think you are a hero. Human beings are not heroes who are capable of suppressing Leviathan. Then now, in 40 verse 9 and following, 41, 9 and following, we have a terrifying monster. But this passage here, 41, 9 to 12, extremely difficult. The various textual witnesses have very different readings. And the problem is that we do not know who's who. We don't know who's who, you see. Though expectations of Leviathan will prove false. Even at sight of him, one will be thrown off. Well, okay, that means Leviathan will be surprising. Right? But the point of the surprise is not that it's ugly. It is not cruel that one should rouse him. Who is this who stands before me? So we have a lot of problems here because we don't know who's who. Right? And so scholars have typically tried to make the text consistent by fixing the text. Make it read one way, either it's all about Leviathan or it's all about God. But I think that the confusion is deliberate. Okay. Right? Almost without exception. Almost without exception, scholars try to fix the text so that it looks like it's all about Leviathan or it's all about God. I argue that the confusion is deliberate because there are times where you cannot distinguish between the monstrous and the divine. And who can discover the outer layer of his attire? Who can penetrate his double armor? So Leviathan here is image following the model of crocodile. So his skin looks armored. And on the left side, you see an Egyptian armor with the scales. You can see it looks like crocodile. Right? In fact, that is how they made the first scale armors. They used reptiles as models. And on the left side, you see, so there are hundreds of archaeological finds of armors that were produced. They were produced by a group called the Hurrians. The Hurrians were Indo-Europeans who were in southern entered the armor based on reptilian skin. So it's double layers. It's got an inner layer made of leather or textile, and on which you have metal scales. We've got hundreds of examples of this, as you see on the left side. See? So it's double layer, right? So on the one hand, it sounds like it's talking about the epidermis and the dermis of the crocodile. On the other hand, it's talking about the armor, double armor of the warriors, which are modeled after the crocodile. And then it talks about how the Leviathan, his sneeze makes light to shine. His eyes are as the eyes of dawn. From his mouth comes flashes and so forth. So this is Leviathan on the march, Leviathan in advance. Now, what's remarkable about this? All these terms are used typically of divine manifestation. Light, flashes, fire, smoke, cold, blaze. All these are terms used of description of the manifestation of God. And they're used together. Flashes and fire and smoke occur together in Genesis 15:17. Cold, fire, and flashes occur together. Fire and smoke, fire and blaze. In other words, the terms here, the cluster of terms are all used of theophany. And now it is used of Leviathan. Again, giving the impression that Leviathan seems to be the manifestation of God. And the climax of it all, there's none like him on earth, creature without fear. None like him on earth is the epithet used elsewhere of God. There's no one like God. Right? God sees every proud one. He is king over all the lofty. He is king is the fixed expression found in the Psalms of the enthronement of God as king. So the context suggests that Leviathan and God are somehow merged. The context of this description is the Persian period. During the Persian period, Zoroastrian religion promoted the idea of dualism, of the idea of a good God versus an evil God. So in response to Persian dualism, biblical writers insisted there's only one God. There's no God of evil and God of good. As Isaiah 45 says, I am Yahweh, there is no other one. I form light and create darkness. I am the maker of weal and the creator of woe. I am Yahweh who does all these things. One God over all that is good and evil. That's what we find in this text. So Leviathan, a terrible monster. In some ways, it's like Moby Dick in Melville's Moby Dick. Moby Dick, right? It's a terrifying monster, but nothing evil about it. Humans think it's evil, it's fascinating, it's terrifying. Don't mess with it. Right? So the ode here of Leviathan mingles fascination and fear. It does not set Leviathan as the opposite of God. In fact, the two seem to be merged. And so the point here is that in encountering the monster, in encountering chaos, encountering a monster who brings devastation and suffering, the poet implies we also encounter God as holy other. God is a fearsome one. So the text here refuses to domesticate the chaos monster, and therefore it also refuses to domesticate God as an awesome, mysterious, and dangerous other. One reason why I love the Old Testament is that it does not cheapen our relationship with God. There's no talk about God being our friend. God is not your buddy. The divine speeches offer no explanation for the suffering of Job, nor does it offer explanation for the suffering of humanity. What we get in these speeches is not an ideal picture of the world. Order does not imply safety in every place. Evil persists in our world. Contrary to popular teachings, evil is not suppressed once and for all. In the Old Testament, evil is persistent. Every day, evil has to be overcome by God and by us. Right? Order does not imply safety in every place. Evil persists. In the world, there are creatures in the cosmos that are wild, they are dangerous and terrifying. And humans cannot control all that is in the cosmos. Job fancies himself being in control, you see. And so when he's in trouble, when he suffers, he thinks the whole world should be turned upside down. And he wants to fix it all. And God's saying, you are not king. That's a challenge. You are not king. You are not, this is not your jurisdiction. Right? You can understand to some extent justice, but you are not in control. We think that if we are in control, the world will be so much better place. I often say that if I were God, this will be such a better world. There'll be no trouble, no hunger, no injustice. It will all be nice if I were God. But I'm not. So God is not us. Do not imagine that we are God. We are not in control. The world's a terrifying place for whatever reason. We can only submit ultimately to mysterious deity who's utterly free. We don't get to tell God how God should act. God acts freely beyond our expectation. And yet, when we submit to God, it's a strange freedom to submission to God in this way. It's a freedom to be a creature along with all the other creatures of the universe. We are not king of the cosmos. We are not the only creature. We are not the only creature that matter. There are other creatures that matter to God. And we are only one in the larger scheme of things. Okay? Thank you. All right. Questions? Yes. Good question. Behemoth is a common Hebrew word. Behema means cattle or animal. Behemoth is used of animals in general, but as a proper name only here. Only here. Now, if you look at Oxford Dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary follows. I said at the beginning, Samuel Burckhardt wrote Sacred Zoology in 1663, and in that zoology, he argued that behemoth must have come from an Egyptian term that's no longer understood. Okay. Burckhardt did not understand Egyptian. They had not studied Egyptian, but Egyptian was not known as a language, well, not deciphered until 1820. Okay. But even before they knew about Egyptian, Burckhardt speculated that behemoth comes from Egyptian word. And so scholars from 1820 onwards speculated that behemoth means the water ox. And that continues to be etymology that we find now in Oxford English Dictionary. That's nonsense. There's no such word in Egyptian. It does not work in Egyptian. Behemoth simply means animals. Animalia. So behemoth is an artificial term. Leviathan is different. Leviathan, we're not sure. They might probably mean the wreathing one, the serpentine one. Okay, the serpentine one. So it's a term that's not invented in the Bible. It's found in Canaanite literature already. Yes. Yes. Yes, correct. So 7 is the number of perfection in ancient East, right? So 7 is quintessentially powerful animal. 7-headed, 7 and 10 around, especially 7 is number of completeness. Supremely terrifying monster. 7-headed. To put 8, it loses the appeal. It's either 7 or 10. Yeah. So within the Old Testament itself, it's only mentioned once as multi-headed. Doesn't mean that mention number. But in Ugaritic, we know it's 7-headed. And Revelation, it follows that tradition. Yeah, so 7, and we've seen this a number of times in our study far, right? 7 is the number of perfection and completeness. So the 7-headed monster means the supremely quintessential monster. Others? Yes, Ray. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Psalm 104 is a hymn. The first part of it is similar to hymns to the sun, found in Egypt, the great hymn to Aten, but also Mesopotamian hymns to Shamash, the god of justice and the sun. So we have the first part of it. All the animals part that's not in the hymns. So they did not simply adopt the hymn; they adapted it for Israelite theology. Yeah. I'm impressed. Great hymn to Aten. I was discussing with my doctoral students last week. Yeah. So our idea always has been that it's Leviathan, opposite of God, right? So okay, that's a Christian point of view. Jews never saw that. How did Jews never saw that? See, Jews always saw it as a symbol of messianic hope. But Christians had been shaped by this teaching, and it's very powerful. Once it is set forward, it takes forever to change, right? And so even when they started to say, oh, these are actually literal animals, they are literal animals, but with symbolic meaning. And this view persisted to the 17th century. So Aquinas, who was Catholic, promoted this, and so the Protestants followed it, Martin Luther in particular, to 1550, right? And then Calvin said, no, these are only natural animals. And immediately, all the Reformed scholars followed the view. Catholics stayed with Aquinas to the 17th century. Lutherans, half and half. Some supported Calvin, others supported Aquinas. But this view remained in place to the 17th century. And I said that the Behemoth and Leviathan continued to this day, right? So to this day, a large group of scholars say, no, these are only natural animals, hippopotamus and and crocodile. Others, challenged by George Bernard Shaw, what's the relevance of this? Can you make a hippo? Say, well, these are actually hippopotamus and crocodile, but they have symbolic meaning. Back to Aquinas. And who supported this? You look at the scholars who support this, Othmar Kahle from Switzerland, they're all Catholics. Our points of view always get in the way of how we interpret the Bible. So to this day, this is very common among German, Swiss, and Austrian scholars from Catholic tradition. So hippopotamus and crocodile, but they represent chaos, whom only God can suppress. Nothing in the text says that God suppresses them. The text warns us that these are realities of the world that we cannot suppress. And it hints that God is in charge of it, but it doesn't say so. It leaves it open-ended for us to believe that God will suppress them, but we know we cannot. I think that's the point. But nothing suggests that these are evil, Satan, or anything like that. They're terrifying. Right? Like Moby Dick. Ahab is true, this is terrible, and he wasn't going to kill it one way or another. Nothing the text suggests that Moby Dick was evil, only to Ahab. It's fascinating, it's terrifying, and don't mess with it. God's like that. Okay, so next week we get to read Job's response and epilogue. Okay, thank you.